The phone buzzed twice on the kitchen counter. Mira wasn't trying to snoop. She was just refilling her coffee when the screen lit up with a name she didn't recognize and a message she couldn't unsee. Last night was everything. Can't stop thinking about you. She stood there for a long moment, the mug still in her hand, steam curling up between her and the phone like a wall she couldn't walk through anymore. 6 years of marriage, 2 dogs, a mortgage they'd celebrated getting approved for with cheap champagne, and one sentence had just taken all of it and turned it into a question mark. This is the story of what happens after the discovery, not the scandal, not the drama for its own sake, but the slow human unraveling of two people who once meant everything to each other. Stay until the end, because the real twist in this story isn't the affair. It's what it reveals about why relationships actually break. Mira and Daniel met the way a lot of ordinary love stories start, unremarkably. A mutual friend's birthday dinner, a seat that happened to be next to his, a joke about the restaurant's terrible parking that made her laugh harder than it deserved. Daniel was steady. Not exciting in a loud way, but the kind of person who remembered how you took your coffee after the second time you mentioned it. Mira was the planner, the one who made spreadsheets for vacations and somehow made that feel romantic instead of tedious. For the first 4 years, things were good in a way that doesn't make headlines. They fought about normal things, whose turn it was to call the plumber, and why one of them left the cabinet doors open. Small friction, easily smoothed over. But somewhere in year 5, the smoothing stopped happening. Daniel got a promotion that came with longer hours and a new team, including a co-worker named Priya, whom he started mentioning in passing, not suspiciously, just in the way you mention someone you talk to at work. Mira, meanwhile, was dealing with her mother's declining health, spending weekends driving 2 hours each way to a care facility, coming home depleted in ways Daniel didn't fully understand. They stopped asking each other how their day was and started just reporting facts. Mom had a bad night. Work's crazy this week. Information exchanged, not connection. Neither of them noticed the exact moment they became roommates instead of partners. That's the part almost nobody notices in real time, because it doesn't happen in a single dramatic scene. It happens in 100 small omissions. Daniel didn't set out to have an affair. Almost no one does. What happened was smaller and, in some ways, more uncomfortable to admit. He found it easier to talk to Priya about the stress of a bad quarter than to talk to his own wife about anything at all. It started as venting after long meetings. Then it became lunches. Then a late-night project that didn't really require both of them to stay, but they stayed anyway. He told himself repeatedly that nothing was happening. And for a while, technically, nothing was. But there's a specific kind of self-deception that happens in these situations, where a person redirects emotional intimacy towards someone new while telling themselves the boundary hasn't been crossed because nothing physical occurred yet. Psychologists sometimes call this emotional infidelity, and it tends to be the actual foundation most physical affairs are built on. The betrayal doesn't start in a hotel room. It starts in the quiet decision to give someone else the version of yourself your partner used to get. Mira, for her part, wasn't naive. She noticed Daniel checking his phone with a stiffness that wasn't there before. She noticed he'd started closing his laptop screen a beat too quickly when she walked into the room. But she was exhausted, grieving a mother who was still alive but slipping away a little more each week. And she made a choice a lot of people make when they sense something is wrong but don't have the capacity to deal with it. She looked away. This is worth sitting with, because it's rarely discussed in stories like this. Betrayal is often not a single villain and a single victim. It's frequently two people slowly disengaging from each other, and one of them eventually filling that emptiness somewhere else. That doesn't excuse what happened next. It explains it, and those are different things. Back to that kitchen counter. Coffee going cold in Mira's hand. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the phone across the room as people do in movies. She set it down, very carefully, like it might go off if she moved too fast. Then she sat down at the table and waited for Daniel to come downstairs. When he did, he knew immediately from her face. Some part of him, the part that had been bracing for this moment for weeks without admitting it, felt something close to relief mixed in with the fear. The waiting was over. "Who's Priya?" Mira said. Not a question. A door opening. What followed wasn't a shouting match. It was worse, in a way, a quiet, devastating conversation where Daniel tried to explain something that didn't have a clear explanation. He said the words people always say. It wasn't supposed to happen. It didn't mean what you think it means. I still love you. Mira listened to all of it with a strange, cold clarity. She wasn't thinking about Priya. She was thinking about every dinner in the last year where Daniel had answered fine when she asked how he was. Every time she'd wanted to talk, he'd said he was too tired. The affair wasn't the wound. It was the confirmation of a wound that had already been forming for a long time. "I don't think I'm angry that you did this," she said finally. "I think I'm angry that you didn't tell me we were already broken." That single sentence is the emotional core of this entire story, and it's worth pausing on. So often the discovery of an affair gets framed as the moment a relationship ends. But in many cases, not all, but many, the relationship had already been quietly ending for a long time before the affair even started. The affair isn't always the cause of the collapse. Sometimes it's just the moment the collapse becomes visible. The weeks that followed didn't look like a movie montage. There was no dramatic packing of bags, no slammed doors. Instead, there was something quieter and, honestly, harder to watch. Two adults trying to figure out how to occupy the same house while everything between them had changed shape. Daniel moved into the guest room. He ended things with Priya immediately, a fact that, to his surprise, didn't repair anything with Mira. He'd assumed that ending the affair would be the fix. It wasn't. Mira wasn't grieving the presence of Priya. She was grieving the version of her marriage she thought she'd had. Grief, in situations like this, doesn't move in a straight line. Mira went through stretches of numbness where she functioned normally, went to work, answered emails, made dinner, followed by sudden waves of anger that would hit her in the middle of something completely unrelated, like loading the dishwasher. She'd find herself crying over the placement of a fork. There's a specific kind of pain that comes not from the betrayal itself, but from realizing you have to reinterpret your entire recent memory. Every warm moment from the last year now came with a question mark attached. Was he already distracted then? Was that dinner real? Or was he just going through the motions? This retroactive doubt is often one of the most exhausting parts of recovering from infidelity. It's not just processing what happened, it's reprocessing everything that came before it. Daniel, meanwhile, was dealing with his own version of this, a slower, quieter unraveling built on guilt rather than betrayal. He kept replaying the small moments where he could have chosen differently. The first lunch he didn't need to accept, the first late night he didn't need to stay for. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He understood with increasing clarity that he had made a series of small choices that added up to something he never intended and could never fully undo. Neither of them talked to friends about it much at first. Shame works that way. It isolates people right when they need connection the most. 6 weeks in, Mira did something that surprised even her. She asked Daniel to go to therapy with her, not necessarily to save the marriage, she was careful to say, but to understand what had actually happened. She didn't want a story where he was simply a villain, and she was simply a victim, because she suspected correctly that the truth was more complicated and more useful than that. In one of those early sessions, the therapist asked a question that reframed everything. When did you two stop being curious about each other? Neither of them had a clean answer. But sitting with the question, they both started to trace it back, past the affair, past the promotion, past the mother's illness, to a much earlier point where they'd simply stopped asking each other real questions. Somewhere along the way, love had quietly become logistics. This is the turning point of the story, and it's an important one, because it's the moment the narrative shifts from who wronged whom to what actually happened here, and what do we do with that information. Not every relationship survives that shift. Many don't, and that's not automatically a failure. Sometimes clarity leads two people to conclude, honestly, that they no longer want the same things. For Mira and Daniel, the sessions didn't produce a fairy tale reconciliation. What they produced was something more honest. Mira realized she had spent years avoiding conflict by disappearing into caretaking and busyness, using her mother's illness as both a genuine burden and a convenient excuse to not deal with her marriage. Daniel realized he had never learned how to sit with discomfort, that his instinct, whenever things got hard, was to find somewhere easier to be, even emotionally. Neither revelation excused the affair, but both of them, for the first time, understood why, not just what. And understanding, it turns out, is the only real foundation anything gets rebuilt on, whether that's a marriage or a person's ability to trust again in general. Here's the honest ending, because this story isn't interested in a fake bow. Mira and Daniel did not simply go back to how things were. They separated for 4 months while each of them worked individually with a therapist. During that time, Mira had real, difficult moments of wondering if she even wanted to try again, and she permitted herself to sit in that uncertainty instead of rushing to a decision either way. Eventually, they did choose to rebuild, but consciously, not automatically. They didn't move back in together until they'd had dozens of hard conversations about what had actually gone wrong, not just the affair, but the years of quiet disconnection before it. Daniel had to earn trust back in small, unglamorous ways: consistency, transparency, showing up in the boring daily moments, not through grand gestures. It's worth being honest here. Statistically and anecdotally, not every relationship that goes through this rebuilds successfully, and choosing not to reconcile is not a lesser outcome. Sometimes it's the healthier one. This particular story ends in reconciliation, but that's not a universal prescription. It's just what happened for these two people, because they were both willing to look honestly at their own role in what broke, not just the other person's. 2 years later, they're still together. Not because the affair was forgotten. Mira has said it isn't something you forget, only something you eventually stop measuring your whole relationship against. What changed was smaller and more durable. They check in with each other now. Actual questions, not status updates. They learned, the hard way, that silence is rarely neutral in a relationship. It's usually the space where distance quietly grows. So here's the real lesson underneath this story, and it's worth remembering long after you stopped watching this video. Infidelity gets talked about like it's the disaster itself, the single event that destroys a relationship out of nowhere. But so often, it isn't the beginning of the ending. It's a symptom of something that had already gone quiet long before. A slow erosion of curiosity, communication, and honesty that neither person names out loud until it's too late to ignore. That doesn't excuse betrayal. The person who steps outside the relationship still made a choice, and that choice still causes real harm. But if you're in a relationship right now, the real warning in this story isn't, "Watch out for affairs." It's this: pay attention to the moment you stop asking your partner real questions. Pay attention to when "fine" becomes an acceptable answer to "How are you?" Because that's usually where the actual danger begins, quietly, long before anyone's phone lights up on a kitchen counter. If this story affected you, whether it reminded you of something you're going through or something you survived, you're not alone in it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more real, honest stories like this one, subscribe, because there's more coming.